Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. This topic for today is the new searching and indexing, and the presentation I will give is the same that I gave at the Tech Conference 2015 on 27th of February. The session is cheekily called Search and You Will Find, but the basic idea is that I'll run through the new searching capabilities that was introduced in Dynamic Web with version 8.6. So, who am I? My name is Jeppe. I'm a senior developer at Dynamic Web. I've been with the company for 7 years, almost 8 years now. And I was one of the principal developers of this new searching API. So, some of you might be thinking, so another search, well, why? And the reason for that is that we have many distinct search implementations in Dynamic Web currently. And that provides some issues, let's just say. Chief among this is that search is inconsistent. So the user experience when you search in one module as opposed to another is not the same. That makes it hard to extend for you as Dynamic Web developers, and it makes it hard for us to maintain as Dynamic Web developers internally. And another issue is that you might have performance issues in one place and not in another place, and it might be hard to track those issues down. But there are more issues, but these are the most important ones. Okay, so we have a new search. Well, what does that give us? Well, like I said, the chief issue with the current implementation is the inconsistency. So the chief improvement here is the consistent experience. It also gives us a modular and open API with a pluggable, that's very pluggable, where you can easily extend and add your own stuff into it. And because it's consistent and because we want to use it across Dynamic Web as platform, that makes it easier for us to maintain, and hopefully it will boost the performance. So, the core concepts in the new indexing, there are a few things that we need to know about. First of all, we've been talking about indexing and searching. So what are indexes? In terms of Dynamic Web, they are definitions for how to store data. So that might be e-commerce data. How do we want to store that to make it easier to find stuff in that? Or it could be users, or it could be whatever type of data. It doesn't have to be Dynamic Web data, though there is a lot of data in Dynamic that would benefit from being in an index. Another concept are queries, and queries are also definitions. All these three top items here, they are definitions, so that they're files that exist on disk. And queries are definitions for how to view the stored data. So if you've already added data into an index, how do you want to view that data? Which results do you want to get back from that index? That's what queries define. Lastly, we have the facet groups. And facet groups are a definition for how to get parameters that are stored in the data. So let's say I have a facet where I want to pick certain products based on maybe their color. Then color would be a facet inside of a facet group, and the facet group knows how to fetch the distinct values for color. And lastly, we have the repositories, and repositories are not they're not actually definitions per se. They are containers for these definitions. So where indexes, queries, and facet groups are files that exist on disk, repositories are folders into which these files go. So that's the structure of how you set up and work with this new searching. You can also think of it as a hierarchical structure where you have the repositories at the top. In those you might have multiple index definitions, and for these index definitions you might have multiple queries, and you might have multiple facet groups, and so on. So this is a layered structure of how things are built on top of each other. You might also flip this around. So indexes, how do they work? Well, they take data from some source, then they run it through a builder that basically pulls the data from the source and manipulates the data in whatever way it wants, and then it stores it into an actual index instance. The index here is not the same as the index definition. The index definition defines what the instance is. I know this might be a bit abstract at the moment, but I'll get back to it once we see the demonstration. So for indexes, pull data from the source, manipulate it, and put it into an instance. Queries, they work on top of the indexed data, so the stored data against which we run the query, and that produces a result. And lastly, for facet groups, again, it works on the indexed data, and then you say, okay, for this specific field, what values does it have, and that produces a list of options. Okay, so let's see that in action. So I'll jump to my Internet Explorer here, and this version that I'm running is a Dynamicweb 8.6.1.13 pre-release. Almost everything that I'm going to show you can do on 8.6.1.12, which as of this recording is the latest 8.6.1 version, well, Dynamicweb version that's released. But we will be releasing an 8.6.1.13 with the changes that I'm talking about here very shortly. Okay, so basically this is just my backend, and I'll go to the Management Center, which is where I work with repositories. And you see I have this node down here where I have one already. We'll get back to this one later. But I'll create a new repository just by right-clicking the repositories node and giving it a name. I'll just call it products. One thing to note though is you can see I'm logged in as administrator. In order to create a new repository, I actually need to be logged in as a user that has admin or higher privileges. Once the repository is created, any user with access to the Management Center can add items to the repository, but only administrators can actually create the repositories. Okay, so it tells me that I have no elements in my repository. In order to fix this, I'll create an index. As you remember from the slides, everything builds on the repository, and then index, then query, and then facet. So that's the order in which we'll be adding elements to this. So I'll call it my products index. I'll click OK. And now I can add my setup for my index definition. So I have instances, builds, and fields. Instances, that's where the data is actually physically stored. So that might be a Lucene index, it might be a Solar index, it might be something else. Out of the box, we provide a Lucene provider. That means that we can create indexes physically on disk inside the file archive. I'll show you where all of this happens later. So I'll give it a name. I'll call it products A, oh, sorry, like that, A, and I'll give it a folder. And the name is so I can recognize it again, so I know which instance I'm talking about. And the folder is the physical location. And you can see the path here, /files/system/indexes/products. Products comes from the index name, oh sorry, the repository name, and it'll add /products/A on top of that, because I have an index name products, and then I have the folder /A. Okay, so I'll click OK, and now I have an instance that's not been built. That's obvious, I suppose. And I'll just add another one. And why I'm doing this, I'll get back to in just a second. So now I have two instances, an instance A and an instance B, and none of them have been built. So the reason for doing this is redundancy. The index engine will always pick the active instance to use as the data store for the queries. And if that one, let's say, is unavailable, maybe it's being built or maybe it hasn't been built yet or something like that, then it will run through this list and find the first one that's active, and then it'll use that one instead. So let's say you have an integration setup where I import products every night, and then I want to build my instances after that. It will only build the ones that are not active to begin with, and then it'll have to build the active one at some point. And the system will then flip over and use one of the ones that's already been built. So that means you won't have any outages. If you only have one, then we can't do that trick. Then we'll have to take the index offline while we're building it. So that's why I'm adding 2, and that's a good trick to remember in case you ever want to have a smooth experience for your users. All right, so that's instances. Next thing is builds. So I'll just add a build and then we'll go through what that means. The build definition is where to pull data from and how to manipulate it. And basically that's all controlled by the builder. So I select a builder here. In this case, I'll select a product index builder. I can also use the SQL index builder. Please disregard this one. This is for the next week's topic, which I encourage you to sign up for if you haven't already. That will be going more into depth with this whole indexing and searching system. But the ones that we provide out of the box is the product index builder and the SQL index builder. The product index builder knows everything there is to know about products and is able to fetch the data from the database, manipulate it in an order that makes sense for a flat index, and actually build that. The SQL index builder gives you an option of basically typing in any query you want and have it take the data from there and put it into an index. We won't go through that one today, but we will be using the product index builder. So I'll call my build a full build, and then I select the builder action. The builder action is something that the builder knows about. It's basically a way of changing the behavior inside of the builder. So if the builder knew how to build a partial index, let's say for products that has been updated since the last time we built, there might be a builder action saying partial, but it doesn't know that right now, so it only shows as full. The big box here at the bottom is where I can manipulate settings on the builder. For the product index builder, I might change the bulk size for which I pull data from the database if I have some performance issues. If the default size of the bulk is 500, but if I wanted to change that, I could do it here by saying maybe I can't. Doesn't matter. I'll just need to check that. But I would be able to add a name here called bulk size and say value 1500 or maybe 200 if I wanted to reduce the size. But that's basically it. We won't do that today. So I'll click OK, and now I have a full build that's using my product index builder. And then you can see I have buttons for each of my instances. That basically means that I could build my instances now, but it wouldn't make any sense because I don't have a schema for the index. And that's where the fields come in. So I'll click Add Field. I can add each of the fields I want manually by filling out this list where I give it a name, and the name is the name that I see in the user interface. I give it a system name, so let's say I could call it product name. And then the system name is whatever I want the field to be called inside of the instance. So that might be product name. And then I pick the source. The source is exposed by the builder. So I need to know what the builder contains in order to pick the correct source. I know that there's one called product name in there, so I could do this. Then I need to specify which data type it is. Some of you will notice that we've added the system.datetime and the datetime array. Those were requested features, to put it mildly, but so we've added that, and that will be available in 8.6.1.13. It's not available in the current version, but it will be in version 13. All right. In this case, I'll pick the string because that's what the product name is. I could give it a boost value. Boost is a way of making a field more relevant. We'll get back to that in at a later point. Lastly, I need to specify whether or not how I want the data to be manipulated inside of the index, or when it goes into the index. I can say I want it stored. If I do that, then it takes the value exactly as it exists in the source and puts that into the index. That means that if I wanted to use a query on that later, let's say for a product name I wanted to search for something called Adidas maybe, and it's with a capital A and rest is lowercase, then I'd actually have to type in a capital A and the rest lowercase. I'd have to match the casing of the actual value in order to match that in the query. Now, there are some issues, some types of data where you actually want that, like an ID or a key of some sort. Then you might want to say, I want this to be an exact match. But if I don't want that, and I just want it to be whichever case I type in, I just want it to match that. There are also other issues associated with the Analyze tab, but that would be the one that I'd pick for that. I also have to remember to check the indexed. Indexed means that the field is queryable, it's searchable. So if it's not indexed, you can't use it for a query. You might want to use this. You might want to do this only and store it in the index if you want some sort of metadata that you don't want to search by. But there are very few scenarios in Dynamic Web where that actually makes sense. But if you were to index your own data, that might make sense for you. But in this case, the product name, I'd use indexed and analyzed. That would be the way of doing it, and I could click OK, and my field will then appear here. Now, okay, so now I've added a field. The first thing I'll do is I'll remove it again. And the reason for that is that there's actually a shortcut. When using the product index builder, I can select a field type called schema extender. The other ones we'll get back to later. But I'll select the schema extender. And then I can select, this is a piece of code that actually knows what the product index builder exposes. So if I pick this one, we'll get back to this field as well in just a minute, and click OK. So now I have a schema extender, and this one works in conjunction with the builder. So the builder exposes some fields, and the schema extender knows about those fields. So if I just want everything that the product index builder produces, then I can just add my schema extender and I'll be done. All right, so I'll just do a quick save because this is still beta software, so I need to save before I can actually do anything else. If I click the plus here, the schema extender shows me all the fields that it knows about. So you see it knows the name, the system name, and it also knows about the source. This is the important bit. This is the value that comes from the builder. And the schema extender knows about that. So I could just hit build now. So now it starts building my first instance, and I can actually click the second one, and that'll start up alongside it. So now I have two instances building at the same time. I can see status. In this case, I can see that there are 15,000 in my product index. I can see when it was started, when it was completed, how long it took, and I can also see messages. And if it fails, there'll be a resume button. I can click that, and it'll pick up from where it left off. Okay, so this is basically what I need in order to create an instance containing product data inside of the new searching in Dynamic Web. So I'll click Save and Close. And now I have my index. So I'll need to add a query on top of this. And I'll say I want active products by group ID. And then I select my data source. In this case, I only have one. So I'll select the products. I'll click OK. So this is the edit query interface, and you can see there are 4 elements. There's a source. I already picked that, but if I wanted to overrule it, I could change it to a different one here. I have parameters, expressions, and then I can specify sorting. Parameters are variables for the expressions, so I'll get back to them when we start using it. Expressions, those are the filters or the rules that specify how I want to view the data. I can add either one expression if I only need a very, very simple query, or in the majority of cases I'll add a group. So in this case I have a new expression group in here where I can start putting in my filters. So I said that this was active products by group ID, so I'll start by selecting active. This is the field that comes from the index. So the query interface knows about that because we've specified which index we're using. So it knows that there's a field called active, and it knows that it's of type Boolean. This interface, it requires some knowledge of .NET system types, but most of the time you'd be able to infer what those are. So in this case you'll see there are booleans, there are string arrays, there are integers. In this case it's actually longs, date times, doubles and stuff like that. But if you have somewhat of a programming background, those concepts should not be foreign to you. Otherwise it's very easy to look it up online. Alright, so now I have my field. Then I need to specify the operator. In this case I want it to be equal. And what do I want it to be equal to? I want it to be equal to the constant Boolean value. So this one matches up with this one. And I want it to be true. Doing this says I want to fetch everything from the index where the field value active has the Boolean value of true. I'll add a second one because I also know that my front end is dependent on language ID. So I'll just select language ID there. And I also want that to be equal to some value. But the language ID is a context value. So that means that it's not something that I can specify as a constant. It's something that changes with the user inside of the front end. So I need something that is dynamic. And to that end, we have macros. So I select a macro expression right here, and that gives me a drop-down containing all the different macro values that I can get. So I have the language ID, which is the one that we want. I could also use card ID, I could use user ID, customer number, and assortment IDs. So I can use these dynamic values inside of my query. And I'll just select the language ID and click OK. Okay, so now I can basically get all active products for a given language into my front end. But I still don't have the by group ID. So I'll start by adding an expression where I specify groups. And then I say they should be equal to, and then I need to specify a group ID on the right. And in order to do that, I need to specify a parameter. Parameters, like I said, are variables that you can fill with a value and have the query be dependent on that. So I'll specify the name group ID, and the reason that I specify group ID here is because I want this to work in conjunction with my e-commerce navigation that I have in my front end. You'll see an example of this in just a second. Then I select the data type as a string, and I don't give it a default value. The default value is used if the value is not set in the front end. Then I can specify a default value. Let's say I want the user to be able to set different groups, but if he doesn't select a group, then I want to force him into group 5, for instance. And I could do this, and whenever he doesn't specify a value, I'll fall back to my default value. If I don't specify a default value, then that means that whenever this parameter is used and it's not specified in the front end, and because there's no default value, then the whole expression that uses that parameter is disregarded. So if I do this and say parameter group ID, and I don't specify a group ID in my front end, that basically means that this whole expression here, the bottom one, is disregarded. It will still look for active values and it will still look for language IDs, but it will not look for group IDs. Okay, so that's the basic thing that I need in order to set up a query. I could add sorting. I can select any field that I want. So let's say I want price. And then I can specify an order, or rather direction. I can say descending like this. So now I have a sort by field that goes on price and goes descending. I could add more, so I could do cascade sorting if I wanted to. I could also leave it out completely. And when I do this, it uses relevancy in order to sort the results. Relevancy is associated with the boost value that we saw before, but I'll get back to that later. So I'll click Save and Close. So now I have my index and I have my query. And I'll just add a dummy facets group here that uses my query. And the reason that I'm doing this, I'm not adding anything to it. I'll get back to what everything in here is at a later point. But the reason I'm doing this is because the product catalog requires a facet group currently. This will be changed with Dynamicweb 8.7, but currently in the 8.6.1 branch, it will require a facet group. Okay, so I'll go back to my content and where I have my paragraph containing my product catalog. So you can see it's already set up to use product groups, and I have a set of product groups here. Now what I want to do is I'll switch to the index show setting, and then I'll select my facet group. In this case, I'll select my product facets, the one that I just created, and I'll click Save and Close, and then I'll click Show Page. So in this case, I now have products that are being fetched from the database, or rather from the index, and this is what I meant with basically having a product catalog using the index. And now I'll select a different group so I can see that it's actually context aware. So whenever I change a group in my navigation, I haven't changed anything in my template. I've just changed settings on my product catalog, and everything just works out of the box. All right, so let's go back to the Management Center and talk a little bit about the features that I skipped. So we'll go to the products repository, and we'll go back to the index. I told you that there were multiple fields that I could add. There's the field that we talked about, and there's the schema extender that we talked about. Then there's the summary field. A summary field is a field that basically takes the values from other fields, aggregates it into one, so that it's available as a summary, basically. So if I wanted to have a product information summary, I could call it product info summary, and then I'll add fields to this. So let's say I wanted the product ID to be part of my summary. I also wanted, let's say I wanted the product number, I wanted the product name, I wanted the short description, and I wanted the long description. This will basically create one field. Oh, what did we say? We said product ID, number, name, short, long. I'm sorry that Internet Explorer is not cooperating at the moment, but I think you get the idea. It will create one field containing all of these informations, basically aggregated into one field. And I could also add boost. When we talked about relevancy, I can give it a boost. The basic boost value for any field where this is not specified is 1. On top of that, you can add a factor. That's basically the value that you wanted to multiply 1 by to make it either more or less relevant. So let's say I want this field to be more relevant than any other field in my query. So I could specify a value of 5 here. Then I say I want it to be indexed and I want it to be analyzed. This basically means that I want it to be searchable and I want it to be non-case aware. I'll click OK, so now I can see I have my new field here. I could add more fields. I could add a grouping field. And grouping fields are basically a way of grouping values. So let's say price, for instance. I want groups of prices. I could add that here, so I could say price groups. Oh, sorry, I'd actually do price group. And I could do the source. So now I need to specify which field I want to pull data from. So in this case, I want to pull that from, it's called product price. That's the field inside the builder that I wanted to pull data from. So in this case, I'll maybe say I want cheap products to be anything from lowest value of that field to 500. And then I'll do not so cheap, maybe from 500 to 1,000. And then I'll add expensive from 1,000 and on. So that basically means that all my products that have prices lower than or equal to 500 will get the value cheap. And all my products that have values that are above 500 and lower than or equal to 1,000 will get the value not so cheap. And all products that have a price that is higher than 1,000 will get the value expensive. And now I say that this is lower than or equal to, and this is higher than. This has to do with the order. So if I change the order of these two around so that it would be 500 to 1,000 for not so cheap, and then cheap anything from below 500, because 500 is already a limit in the top one, that will be included as a value for the top one. So 500 is included here because it's the top one. It's not included here because it's already included there. I hope that makes sense, but you need to try it out, I think, in order to get the sense. So 500 products with the value of 500 in price will be included here. 501 pence, let's say, will be included here. All right, so I need to specify the type, and this is not the type of the data that I pull from the source. This is the type that I pull from here, basically. So in this case, it'll be string. I could specify a boost value, so if I wanted to have a higher boost on this, I could do that. In this case, because I want to use this as a filter inside of a facet and not something that the user can type in, I want it to be stored because I could just do a one-to-one match, and I want to add it to the index. So I'll click OK. So now I have two new fields, and once I've changed my schema in any way or my data has changed, I need to rebuild my indexes. So I'll just do that. Well, let's see, now we have an error. So I can see an exception. This is for all you developers out there. So I'll just remove these fields again. I already have an index set up where this works. I'll just click Save and make sure that my index actually works this time. So I'll build them. And you can see now that it builds. So while it's doing that, let's talk about facets. We skipped the facets completely before because it wasn't necessary in order to get a working example. Facets come in two different varieties. There's a field facet where I simply specify, let's say in this case I could say color, because I know that there's a field called color, and then I specify the field that has the value of color, and in this case it's right there. And then I specify a query parameter that this goes against. So it knows about the query because we selected that when we created it. And then I need to specify values from this facet. Where do they go inside of the query? And I only have the group ID at the moment, so I wouldn't be able to use the colors, but I'll show you an example where I have this set up. I could also do a list facet. In this case, I'll use color again. And I'll select the colors. And again, query parameter, all this is the same. Where this differs from the field facet is I can specify the values. So I could add a value here called red. And if I know that that's variant option 1, then I could do this. I could say green, and that might be VO2. And I could add blue, and that would be VO3. So if I know that there are multiple colors, let's say I have hundreds and hundreds of colors as variants, but I only want to display 3, then I can do this. I can also, if I wanted to make groups of colors available, so let's say I wanted to do something like autumn colors and spring colors, I could do autumn, and then I could specify which color I want there, and I can say autumn again, and the same one. So now I have 3 facet values here, 3 different values with the same name. That basically means that the facet in the front end will display 1 value, in this case autumn, but that will have 3 values. So I'll choose anything that's brown and red and orange maybe for autumn colors, and I could do one as well called spring, and that might be VO4 and VO5. So I think you get the idea that I can basically make multiple select values into one to make it easier for my customers in the front end. Okay, so let's switch to another example that I have here where I've already set up a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about. So I have an index where I only have one instance in this case, but it's still based on the product index builder. I use the schema extender. We didn't talk about excluded fields actually. Let's just touch upon that real quickly. So if I have a schema extender and I know that there's a field that it adds to my index that I don't want, I can add it here. Simply give the name of the field, and this is the source name of the field that I want to exclude. So let's say I don't want product cost. I could do like this, and when the next time I build my index, then product cost will not be part of the index. I can also do this if I wanted to change the type of or rather the setup of a field. So let's say I have product name where the schema extender specifies it as indexed and analyzed, but I actually want it to be stored instead, or for some values that the schema extender specifies as stored and indexed where it's not case insensitive in searching, but I want it to be. I could exclude it, and then I could include it with a different setup. I'll just do cancel here. We have a summary field where I have product name, short description, and long description. I can use this for free text search. And then I have a price range. This is the same we talked about before. So this index has already been built. So let's move on to the query. As you can see, this is a bit more complex than the example that we looked at before. So I have a free text parameter, I have a price range parameter, I have a price range free, I have color, and I have group ID. And if I look at the expressions, then I have group ID, and that matches the group ID. I have active and language like before. I have a color selector. I have a variant selector where in this case I say I only want to see products that are not variants. Then I have my free text. I have price range and I have price. And in this case the last one is actually a between operator that looks at the input that comes from the price range free. I see the time is a bit progressed, so maybe I should just really quickly show you what this looks like in the front end. I'll just enable my template, my facets template, so we can see that. So I have that one, and this one is fine. So I'll go to my content, and I'll switch to the correct facet group. I'll click Save, and let's refresh the page out here. So let's clear everything off so we can see everything from the bottom. So I have price range. You can see I have cheap, mid-range, and expensive, and it also tells me how many products I have in each. I have the color picker where I can see which colors are available, and then I have the group selector here, and you'll see that this one actually matches up with my navigation over here, and it doesn't include any groups that might not be in the navigation. And there's actually it's actually not magic. It's something that I've set up. I'll just show you what that looks like in the facet. So here's the groups, and it's like I said before, it's a list facet. So as you have bikes, and that's group 5, eyewear, group 22. So I've defined all of this, and then I have one at the bottom called all bikes. And all these groups are basically the ones that exist. This one, as you can see, group 5, it says that at the bottom, and 14, 15, 16, 18, and 19. So those are the ones that I've added here, and they all have the same label. So if I clear this off again, you can see groups. I have all bikes. If I select that and click send, then I have all the bikes that are in either one of the groups up there. If we look at what the query string looks like when working with parameters, you can see I have the price range. That was a parameter. I have a color, that's a parameter, and I have group ID. Those are parameters. So the values that go into the query, they come from the query string. So I could basically change it up here. So if I wanted, instead of having this long list, I could just say group 5. I could do that manually. And then the rest of my template, the rest of my search, in fact, becomes context aware. Even the navigation knows about this. And I could change it to none, and I could click send, I could click clear, I could do whatever I want. Okay, the last thing I just want to mention really quickly before I go into more detail about the template, I'll just include my parameters, because the facets are available in the template as template tags, but my parameters are also available, and I can specify that I only want to work with the ones that are not handled as a facet. So if I refresh this page, I can see it changes a bit. I have a free text and I have a price range free. The price range free is where I can specify, let's say 100 and 200. I could click send, and then it finds all products in that range. I could also do a free text search. So let's say I want to find, what's it called, Linsk E. There's an S, like I could do that because I can see that there's a name right there. I could do send, and it finds all the products that have that value inside of it, and all the rest of the parameters are actually context aware, so that it knows these products are in the expensive category, but they're not in actually one of the groups, so the group filter goes away. Okay, and that's because I've configured my template to do that. If I look at the template right here, this is a simple form inside of which I have the ID, basically so I know which page to posts to. Then I get the loop of facets. I go through all of them and I render drop-down boxes for each of them. I could do something different for each of them if I wanted to. All the control is in the template, it's not in the configuration, so you can do whatever you want. There's also a loop of parameters, and in this case I say if the parameter is handled as a facet, then I don't want to handle it. In any other case, I'll loop through the parameters and I'll do something different. In this case, I'm doing something different based on the type of the parameter. That's the system string, system boolean, and that. And I'll say if it's a boolean, then I'll do a checkbox. If it's not, if it's in this case a double array, which is what price is, then I'll render a to and from. Other than that, I'll just do a string, and then I'll do the output actually here. So that's what corresponds to my my values here. So my drop downs that come from the facets, and my text boxes that come from the parameters loop. All right, so that was a very fast overview of how to work with this. I promised one last thing, that is actually to show you where all of this resides inside the file archive. So if I go to the file archive and go to System, then I have the note here, Repositories, I have Products, and TechConf 2015. Those are my repositories, and if I click those, you can see the files inside of it. So I have my active products by group ID.query, product facets.facets, and products.index. Same thing for the other one. The indexes, the physical indexes, they reside here in System Indexes, and then you can see I have Products and TechConf, and then I have Products and the A and the B, and the same here. And whenever they're built, they all generate a log file that I can view. They reside inside Diagnostics, and they're still organized by the name of the repository, and then the name of the index, and then the name of the instance. Here I have all of these folders that contain log information about each single build that I've done. So I have the log here. If I just preview, oh sorry, I'll just do a different thing. Actually, there's a new feature that was introduced with 8.6.1, System Logs. And it'll go through my file archive and it'll look for all log files. So if I go into System, Diagnostics, Products, Product Index, and I'll find my log file here, and it'll show me exactly what happened. So it says it's running and fetching build definitions, creating index writer, and doing all of this. This can be used for troubleshooting if something goes wrong. Okay. So where do I get more information about this the new capabilities of the dynamic web? So this webinar has been recorded, so it'll be available online shortly. You'll be able to find it on our Engage site. Also, you can look at the forums. There are quite a few threads already. And also we have a preliminary documentation available that you can download. It's a PDF format because it's not complete yet, but it will be available on a documentation site once it's ready. So let's just take a quick look at how to get that. So it's at developer.dynamicweb.com/downloads/documentation. You can also find it, go to downloads here, click documentation, And then it's here under the dynamic web section. There's the indexing draft. If I click that and click open, then it's available here.